It's chilling to read through the comments on videos about animal attacks. You see people dissecting every decision, every misstep that might have led to tragedy. Why would someone wade into a pond known to be inhabited by alligators? Why leave a tent unzipped in snake country? Sometimes, it seems, a simple lack of awareness can have devastating consequences. I find myself wondering about the line between caution and recklessness, between respect for nature and a fatal underestimation of its power. Today, I want to share one of the most terrifying animal attack stories I've ever come across. It happened on July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet, humid, the air thick with the memory of the previous night's rain. But by evening, something truly shocking would happen, something that would shake the entire community of workers there. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was well liked. He was a quiet man, known for his skill in improving water systems for growing palm trees. He enjoyed walking the farm alone, jotting down observations in a small notebook. He'd been working in Indonesia for about 4 months, and in that time he'd taken countless photos of the local insects, birds, and animals. The workers noticed that Reggie never shooed away snakes or lizards. Instead, he would kneel down, observing them with an almost childlike curiosity. On that particular day, Reggie went out to do his usual rounds, checking the water ditches before the rainy season arrived. He carried his notebook, a measuring tape, and his phone for recording notes. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, spotted Reggie near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked with him about the huge snakes that locals claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one of these big snakes up close. The workers later said he didn't seem worried by their warnings at all, dismissing their concerns as old wives' tales. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles, with rows of palm trees separated by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the recent rain, making some areas quite slippery. Dragonflies flitted over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were the distant drone of chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat hung heavy, making everything feel still. Large snakes, reticulated pythons, are common in this area. They are among the largest snakes in the world, growing to lengths of over 20 feet and weighing over 200 pounds. They hunt by lying in wait near water, ambushing animals like pigs or dogs. Occasionally, they even attack people. While such attacks weren't frequent in this part of Indonesia, the snakes had been moving closer to populated areas as their natural habitats were destroyed. Local people knew to avoid them, and some carried long knives for protection when working near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew concerned and walked toward the last place he'd seen him. The farm was almost silent, save for the incessant buzzing of insects. That's when Amir saw something that made him freeze. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. Just a few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's midsection was hugely swollen, as if it had consumed a very large animal. Amir stood motionless, then began shouting for Luffy and the other workers. Within minutes, 5 men were standing there, watching the snake as it slowly began to move toward the bushes. The swollen midsection dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a safe distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth, coiling up in defense. The snake was massive, around 15 feet long. None of the workers dared to approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men kept a close watch on the snake. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. I've seen the aftermath of snake encounters, the fear that lingers long after the event itself. I remember one case, not unlike the one I'm about to describe, where the sheer speed of the venom's effect was chilling. It reminds you how fragile life can be, especially in the face of the natural world's hidden dangers. In one instance, a worker noticed a strange bulge in a captured python, far too large to be any normal animal. The men who saw it were horrified. They watched through the night, flashlights cutting through the darkness. When the police finally arrived, they made a grim decision. It took many blows with knives and poles to finally stop the snake. The workers stood in silence as the snake was cut open. Mud and fluid mixed together on the ground, and inside, curled up and covered in slime, was Reggie's body. His clothes were torn, soaked through. Someone recorded it on their phone, and the video spread quickly before being taken down. Reggie's notebook and phone, damaged by the moisture, were found near the water's edge, covered in mud. His body was placed in a sealed coffin and sent home. Afterwards, the farm put up new warning signs telling workers not to travel alone. Reggie's cabin was cleaned out, and his belongings were shipped to his family. Then there's the story of Clare Johnson. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, Rajasthan, India. The air was cool after a hot day. Inside a canvas tent, 2 travellers slept, unaware that a snake had crawled beneath the entrance. Clare was 26, from Melbourne, Australia. She'd quit her job as a graphic designer to travel Asia for a year, a trip she'd saved for almost 2 years to make happen. Her friends knew her as adventurous, but careful. She researched the places she stayed, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph wild tigers. She'd seen one that day, a female near a waterhole, even if it was far away. She was staying at a cheap eco-camp outside the park, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she'd met on the train from Jaipur. The camp was basic but clean, with tents on raised wooden platforms. Clare was meticulous about keeping their tent organized. Every night she shook out her shoes and zipped the entrance. The evening was cool, so she zipped the canvas door all the way, leaving only a small opening for air. The camp was next to dry grassland, with thorny acacia trees and tall grass. Insects buzzed and clicked, and sometimes they heard peacocks in the distance. The ground was hard dirt covered with leaves and small rocks, an environment perfect for reptiles hunting in the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan, recognized by the circular pattern on their hoods. They usually avoid people, but sometimes enter human areas seeking mice, rats, or warmth. Adult cobras can grow to 6 feet long, with venom strong enough to kill a person within hours without treatment. tour guides warn campers to check bedding and clothes, as snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. That night, sometime after 4 a.m., Lara woke to a rustling sound near the tent's bottom. Half asleep, she turned on her phone's flashlight. The beam revealed a spectacled cobra coiled inches from Clare's sleeping bag, its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Clare moved in her sleep and touched the snake's body with her bare ankle. The cobra bit her twice, sinking its fangs into her skin above her heel. It happened so fast, Lara almost missed it, until Clare gasped. Lara screamed, waking the camp. Clare sat up, grabbing her ankle, where 2 small holes marked the bites. Camp workers ran to their tent with flashlights, seeing the snake crawl out. Clare's breathing became fast and shallow, her eyes glassy. When she tried to stand, her legs gave way. Her voice was quiet as she said her legs felt like jelly before falling back onto her mat. The camp had no antivenom. Staff put Clare in a jeep to drive her to the hospital, Lara pressing a scarf above the bites to slow the poison. The drive took over 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin became pale, cold, and damp. When they reached the clinic, the medical staff said there was nothing they could do to save her. I've always found it unsettling how quickly a life can change, how a normal day can turn tragic in a heartbeat. I'm thinking of Jorge Cruz, a 42-year-old man who worked in a lime orchard in Mexico. He woke before sunrise, just like any other day, to tend to the trees. He taught his son about the fruit, fixed carts for neighbors, and felt most at home working barefoot in the soil. But this day, September 9th, 2015, would be his last. The afternoon was hot, heavy. Jorge was picking limes with 2 neighbors, Raul and Mateo, near a pile of cut branches. They joked about the heat, moving between the trees, their attention on the fruit. Jorge, hat pushed back, reached for a low branch. The ground was hard, covered with leaves and roots, the cut branches providing shade for small creatures. It was quiet, every sound distinct. They weren't paying attention to the potential dangers lurking nearby. A terciopelo, a type of poisonous snake common in Central America, was hidden amongst the leaves. These snakes, also known locally as naka, can grow up to 5 feet long, and their venom is incredibly dangerous, destroying tissue and causing severe bleeding. They blend in perfectly with the leaves, staying still until someone is right on top of them. That morning, neighbors had mentioned seeing more snakes because of recent rains, and Jorge's wife had warned him to wear boots while cleaning brush. Raul later said he'd also cautioned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge brushed off the concerns, saying he'd work quickly. When Jorge shifted his position, the snake struck. It burst from the leaves, biting him above the ankle. Raul and Mateo heard Jorge cry out as he pulled back, grabbing at the wound. Before they could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood stained the dirt. The pain was immediate and severe. He bent over, dropping the fruit. Within minutes, his leg began to swell, the skin bruising. He started vomiting, sweating, his face pale. Raul tied a cloth above the bite marks and splintered Jorge's leg with a broom handle. A neighbor brought a cart, and they rushed him toward the village clinic. The ride was slow and bumpy, dust covering his skin. He became confused, his speech broken, drifting in and out of consciousness. At the clinic, the nurse found his pulse weak. His blood pressure low. They had basic supplies, but no antivenom, the medicine needed for snake bites. They radioed the regional health centre, but the nearest supply and an ambulance were hours away. Jorge's condition worsened. He grew disoriented, his breathing shallow. By evening, despite their efforts, Jorge died at the clinic. Raúl said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick plants. Meanwhile, back at the campsite in Australia, Lara's parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They requested that her body be cremated following local customs. The camp management decided not to close, but they hired a snake expert who gave weekly talks to new guests. These talks taught people how to check their tents and where to keep lights on at night to avoid snakes. Lara eventually returned to Germany and wrote a detailed story about her experience on a travel website. Her story warned other backpackers to always check their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. For years, her post was quietly shared as a reminder to travelers who romanticized sleeping close to nature without understanding the real dangers. This incident, like Jorge's death, shows how important it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when staying in wilderness areas. Even experienced travelers can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. Preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. I've seen firsthand how a single moment can change everything. There was a village and a man named Jorge who learned this in the most tragic way imaginable. He was bitten by ants, and even though his belongings were returned to his family, stained with the memory of what happened, his absence was a constant shadow. In the weeks that followed, a veterinarian came to the village, bringing antivenom and teaching the locals how to respond to emergencies. He showed them how to make splints, apply press bandages, and when not to use tourniquets. The villagers cleaned up the area where Jorge was bitten, marking it with a simple pole. His wife wore his hat during harvest, a constant, visible reminder. And from that day forward, each harvest began with a serious reminder to be careful. Then there was Mina. It was May 2nd, 2018. And the air over the Cross River felt heavy. Mina Belagan, just 19, had returned from university a week earlier and loved spending afternoons at the river. She was known for her lively spirit and often brought her cousins to swim. The older villagers warned them about snakes during the dry season, but Mina didn't believe danger lurked in the shallow water. One day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her. She dreamed of starting a community project to teach children how to swim safely, always seeing the river as a place of life, not peril. The river's surface looked calm, reflecting the cloudless sky, but as the locals knew, something was always moving underneath. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks. Dragonflies hovered just above the water. African rock pythons, the largest snakes on the continent, can grow over 20 feet long. They lie in wait, striking with powerful jaws and constricting their prey until it stops breathing. While attacks on people are rare, they are known to prey on goats, dogs, and even antelopes, especially near dwindling water sources during the dry season. Earlier that week, a fisherman had warned Mina's uncle about a large python sunning itself on a log nearby. children were told not to swim until the rains came. But Mina insisted the shallow bend was safe. She had been in the water for almost an hour when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was a branch, but then it curved and moved silently across the water. An enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed, its jaws locking onto Mina's side as its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils tightened, forcing the air from her lungs. The water churned as Mina fought, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their knives and rush to the river. By the time they arrived, the snake was still moving in the water, having pulled Mina deeper. The men cut at the python until it finally released her. They pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, but she had been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, her lips a deep blue. The villagers tried to revive her, but it was too late. Mina's body was placed on a mat as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks, the riverbend remained empty. Fishermen refused to cast their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers, especially when wild animals sought water and food near human settlements. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. And then there was Sweetwater, Texas, on June 10, 2013. The fairground was scorching hot, and the heat rising off the tarps and metal bleachers would turn a routine demonstration into a day where small mistakes had serious consequences. Samuel "Sammy" Price, 38 years old, had been a volunteer snake handler at the annual rattlesnake roundup since he was a child. He did repair work around town and showed up every year to handle snakes for visitors. People respected him because I've seen how quickly things can go wrong when working with powerful animals, even when precautions are in place. Sometimes, the most experienced among us are the most vulnerable, lulled into a false sense of security by years of success. It's a lesson I've learned through many years of studying the interactions between humans and the natural world. I remember reading about Sammy, a seasoned snake handler, and his accident at a rattlesnake roundup. He was steady, experienced, the one who taught the new volunteers. He wasn't one to rush, always ensuring techniques were correct. That year, the festival was more crowded, the schedule tighter. Sammy had been moving between snake pits all morning, answering questions, spending hours in the sun. He'd skipped breakfast to keep things running smoothly and was feeling drained, but attributed it to the heat and fatigue. His colleagues urged him to rest, drink water, but he continued working, feeling responsible. The roundup used shallow pits surrounded by temporary barriers, a raised platform for the announcer, folding chairs for the audience. The air was thick with the smells of fried food, car exhaust, and dust. Shade cloths and water containers were nearby, but the area was cramped, keeping everyone in the sun. Spectators leaned against the fence, phones raised, recording every move. The setup, designed for clear viewing, reduced space for handlers and limited opportunities for cooling down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes Potent pit vipers, typically 4 to 5 feet long, possess venom that causes tissue damage, bleeding, and potentially systemic shock. Large adults can strike with surprising speed and reach. Under stress, a snake might twist unexpectedly, altering a handler's grip and exposing unprotected skin. Even the most skilled can be bitten when a snake is already agitated, or when heat and repeated handling elevate its stress. Earlier that day, organisers had warned volunteers to rotate and limit heavy handling during the hottest hours. A minor incident that morning had prompted a formal reminder to take breaks and hydrate. Medical personnel were present with IV fluids and anti-venom. Sammy heard and agreed, but the crowd and the busy schedule drew him back. He took a heavy Western diamondback from a colleague, entered the pit with a leather glove and snake hook, and lifted the snake with his practiced motion. For a moment, the crowd seemed to relax, calmed by his steady presence. Then the snake shifted, twisting sharply under stress. It lunged, its fangs piercing the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled he was, but his face reddened, sweat beading on his forehead. He continued talking to the crowd for several minutes, but his breathing grew shallow, and he requested a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, discoloration spreading down his forearm. Within minutes, the swelling extended past his elbow towards his shoulder, the skin darkening with mottled bruising as tissue damage progressed. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent when he could no longer stand. Paramedics applied Prez to slow the venom's spread, initiated IV fluids, and administered the first vials of antivenom. His breathing became shallow, his skin cold and blotched with bruising. Despite the rapid treatment, his blood pressure plummeted, his pulse faded. Witnesses later recalled the frantic efforts to keep him conscious, as medics called for an airlift that never arrived in time. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting regional medics to review emergency procedures and conduct practice drills. A younger relative of Sammy's began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration over showmanship. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist for demonstrations, including maximum handling times, required breaks, and a rapid evacuation plan to the nearest ambulance access point. It makes me think of another situation, very different on the surface, but with similar threads of risk and misjudgment running through it. It was March 15, 2016, in the dense rainforests of southeastern Cameroon, where towering mahogany trees stretched endlessly under the humid canopy. Hidden among thick jungle vegetation near the Sangha River, a converted logging camp sat isolated on 50 acres of abandoned concession land. Once, it had housed a legitimate primate research station with proper government permits. But those days were long gone. Erica Winslow, a 52-year-old former wildlife photographer from America, had been operating this facility illegally for 3 years after her research permits expired. She refused to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old western lowland gorilla weighing 375 pounds. Erica's demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her notorious among local officials and village chiefs. She constantly complained about wildlife inspections and refused to acknowledge that her research permits had expired. With no formal primate training, She relied entirely on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods she found online. Her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar using intimidation tactics. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened territorial aggression for weeks, throwing branches at visitors and damaging the reinforced walls of his enclosure. Local villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night, and Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter for the past 2 weeks, defying Erica's commands entirely. Cameroon's Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife had been building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. The silverback sat calmly beside Erica's lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. When I read that line, it stayed with me for days. It's a stark image of the raw power and unpredictable nature we often fail to appreciate in wild animals. The incident occurred after months of warning signs. Caesar, a western lowland gorilla, had been deteriorating under improper care. These animals are incredibly powerful. Adult males possess the strength of 10 humans. Their hands can exert crushing force, and their canine teeth can tear through flesh and bone. And while generally peaceful in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictably violent, especially when they perceive threats to their territory. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress from improper captivity and inadequate social interaction. These creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclosure, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod fashioned from old logging equipment and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20x30 foot reinforced pen. A decision that would prove fatal. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 3 to 75-pound silverback charged across the enclosure with terrifying speed. His body slammed into Erica's chest with the force of a small vehicle, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing press. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, which still clutched the makeshift prod. His bite force of over 800 pounds per square inch crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated with an audible pop as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a growing pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted with brutal force, snapping her femur bone. The jagged fracture tore through muscle and skin. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her ribcage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow and laboured as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp as life left her. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning when the usual sounds of morning feeding never came. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief, while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22nd, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area, known for its crystal-clear streams and abundant wildlife, had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbours it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighbourhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclosure and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators perfectly designed for stealth hunting, with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, it's a fatal error to assume that raising a wild animal in captivity somehow erases its fundamental nature. I've seen it time and again in my research. Even when seemingly domesticated, these creatures retain all their primal instincts. And when placed in unfamiliar surroundings, those instincts can become even more pronounced, fueled by heightened territoriality. I think of Landon, who tragically misjudged this very thing. he released Scout, his 3-year-old cougar, from the transport crate, wanting to give the animal a chance to stretch and explore. He truly believed Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed the wildness within, treating this predator as nothing more than an oversized house cat. As Landon's family began setting up their fishing gear by the water, Scout emerged from confinement, immediately taking stock of this new environment. His tawny coat blended seamlessly with the brush, and his yellow eyes methodically scanned, registering every movement, every sound. All 140 pounds of the cougar was now fully alert. The predatory switch flipped the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill their water containers. Scout's pupils dilated. He crouched low behind a fallen log, powerful muscles coiling, tail twitching in that unmistakable hunting rhythm, calculating the distance, the timing, with deadly precision. In complete silence, he launched himself, covering 20 feet in a single, explosive leap. The cougar's body struck Landon squarely in the back. Those 4-inch claws, nature's perfect design for gripping struggling prey, sank deep into Landon's shoulders and back. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. K9 teeth, specifically evolved for this killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae, severing the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down. Landon couldn't move his arms. His face was submerged. His body was completely paralyzed. He drowned within 90 seconds. His body went completely limp as Scout maintained his grip, following an evolutionary millions of years in the making, ensuring the prey was thoroughly subdued before feeding. Then the cougar did something else entirely instinctive, dragging Landon's lifeless body toward the brush line, caching his kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children, Emma and Jake, and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck. They remained there for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers finally arrived. Authorities immediately launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited a fierce debate about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose to families and communities. I remember reading about another case, this one unfolding on September 8th, 2015. It was on a sprawling ranch property in South Texas, where endless mesquite trees dotted the landscape beneath a star-filled sky. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclosures and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and his desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable, spotted kitten into a powerful 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond, forged in her cubhood, would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had refused all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure. Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors, living miles away, even reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars, the 3rd largest big cats in the world, possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power and jaws that can exert over 1,400 pounds of press per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30 by 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with tremendous force. I've seen firsthand how quickly things can turn when dealing with wild animals. I remember reading about a woman named Brianna Ellis, a marine biology student in Florida. Her story, like so many others, is a stark reminder of the power and the danger that comes with keeping exotic creatures. On June 14, 2018, in a quiet suburban neighborhood in Homestead, Florida, Brianna had created a backyard pond system for her thesis research. This 40x60 FT pond had become home to a 9-foot American alligator named Brutus. 2 years prior, Brianna had rescued Brutus from a failing roadside attraction. He was malnourished and living in terrible conditions. She believed she could provide a better environment for him and safely study his behavior. I have often wondered if that conviction clouded her judgment. Her friends, Kevin Torres, a photographer documenting her work, and Amanda Walsh, a social media influencer who rented the house for its unique feature, shared the property with her. The landlord, however, had no idea that a 350 lb apex predator was living in his backyard. Over the past month, the warning signs had escalated. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive during feeding times, lunging at the pond's edge whenever anyone approached. Yet, Brianna continued to hand-feed him, confident that her scientific understanding gave her an edge. Neighbors had complained about strange splashing sounds at night. Brutus had been floating motionless for hours, displaying classic hunting behavior. It was a tragedy waiting to happen. These American alligators are, after all, perfectly evolved killing machines, virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 800 pounds, with jaws capable of exerting nearly 3,000 pounds of press per square inch. I've read that their bite force is strong enough to crush a bowling ball. Brianna made a fatal mistake as the Florida sun began to set. She had dropped her pH testing equipment into the deeper section of the pond and needed to retrieve it. Despite Kevin's suggestion to use a pool net, Brianna insisted on entering the water herself. Dusk, tragically, is the most active hunting period for alligators. As Brianna waded into the pond, Brutus began his approach. The 350 lb alligator moved through the water with incredible precision, creating no visible wake. Brianna, focused on her task, remained unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away, perfectly motionless beneath the surface. The attack was devastatingly fast. Brutus launched himself upward and forward, his massive jaws opening wide. His bite encompassed Brianna's entire right thigh, crushing her femur bone instantly with nearly 3,000 pounds of press per square inch. Brianna's screams filled the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll technique. The alligator spun his body rapidly, tearing Brianna's leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood into the water, causing immediate shock. Before Brianna could escape, Brutus attacked again, clamping down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her rib cage. There are moments when the animal world reminds us of its raw power, its untamed nature. I remember reading about a case where an alligator, named Brutus, dragged a woman named Brianna into a pond. He held her underwater, his grip relentless. The thrashing went on for nearly 2 minutes as Brutus performed his instinctive drowning technique. Brianna's body went limp, her lungs filled with water and blood. Even when she stopped moving, the alligator didn't release her. The dive team recovered only scattered remains. Brutus retreated to the deepest section of the pond with his kill, and the local authorities began investigating the illegal possession of such a dangerous reptile. That same year, a man named Sean Gallagher, a former wildlife rehabilitator, lived in a weathered log cabin nestled deep in the Adirondack Mountains. He shared his isolated retreat with Kodiak, an 8-year-old 400-pound American black bear. Sean had illegally acquired Kodiak as an injured cub, claiming he rescued him from certain death. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods superior led him to keep Kodiak, even after losing his professional credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room within the cabin, a setup that became increasingly inadequate as Kodiak grew. Sean's journal entries revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions, his mental state deteriorating from years of isolation. The warning signs had escalated dramatically. Kodiak systematically destroyed the cabin's interior, tearing furniture and clawing the walls. He became aggressive when Shaun limited his food, displaying territorial behavior that should have been a clear warning. Most concerning, Kodiak obsessively tested the doors and windows, pushing against them as if calculating escape routes. American black bears, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, are deceptively powerful. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour and possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing hundreds of pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing a human skull. And their 4-inch claws, designed for climbing and digging, are devastating weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime, when their predatory instincts are heightened. Shaun made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he entered Kodiak's room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera equipment. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Shaun desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were destroyed. He stepped quietly into the room with only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in a deep sleep. But Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that makes black bears such effective predators. His senses were at their peak, and captivity had made him territorial about his confined space. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 strides. Shaun had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with those 4-inch claws. The blow struck Shaun squarely in the chest with tremendous force, raking 4 parallel gashes across his ribcage, penetrating deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Shaun backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Shaun could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Shaun's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Shaun's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Shaun's body went limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone, as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Shaun's torso, ribs splintering under the press, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Shaun's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Shaun's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. There are moments when the line between fascination and tragedy blurs, when our attempts to connect with the wild end in unforeseen consequences. I have spent years studying such cases, piecing together the stories left behind. It was March 22nd, 2015, near Houston, Texas. The air was thick, almost viscous, and the sounds seemed to carry in strange ways. It was there, behind a modest ranch house, that a Bengal tiger restlessly paced its enclosure. The tiger belonged to Michael Torres, a 41-year-old mechanic, a man who preferred the company of engines and animals to people. He lived alone, filling his days with fixing old cars and caring for his menagerie, which had grown from ball pythons and iguanas to a serval, and finally Raja, his 6-year-old Bengal tiger. He kept Raja in a large enclosure on his property, reinforced with steel and heavy wire. Neighbours would occasionally see him walking with Raja on a chain lead, talking to the animal like a friend. Michael believed Raja recognized his scent, his tone. He even claimed the tiger would never hurt him, saying it was all about trust, earning respect through calm handling. That afternoon, a friend, Luis Alvarez, stopped by as Michael was preparing to clean Raja's enclosure. Raja was unusually agitated, pacing and lashing his tail. Construction noise from a nearby property seemed to be the cause. Michael believed the tiger would settle once he began working. But Bengal tigers, even those raised from cubs, retain their predatory instincts. They are apex predators with a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds. Male tigers can weigh over 400 pounds and a strike with enough power to shatter ribs. Luis watched as Michael opened the inner gate, leaving the outer gate partially open for convenience. Raja continued pacing, his muscles tense. Then Luis saw the tiger freeze, its ears flattened, body crouched low, tail twitching. A second later, Raja lunged. I've always been drawn to stories where humans and animals attempt to bridge the gap between their worlds. But sometimes those bridges collapse with tragic consequences. There was Ahmad, for instance, in Indonesia. He cared for a Komodo dragon, feeding it by hand, proud that it seemed to trust him. His employees warned him, of course, that the animal was no longer tame. But Ahmad only smiled, convinced the dragon knew him. That Thursday morning, the air hung heavy with the smell of diesel. Ahmad had skipped feeding the dragon the previous evening, and he found its water basin overturned. He wanted to clean it before the day began. As he entered the enclosure, the gate creaked, the sound echoing in the stillness. The dragon was motionless in the far corner. Komodo dragons, I knew, could grow up to 10 feet long. Their bite is strong enough to crush bone, and their venom contains toxins that cause rapid blood loss. They are ambush predators, capable of surprising bursts of speed. In captivity, they can become defensive, especially if underfed. Yudi, working in the front of the warehouse, heard a clang of metal, a low thud, then a sharp cry. He ran toward the back, rounding the corner just as Ahmad fell. The dragon had latched onto his right calf, teeth sunk deep. Blood darkened the concrete. Ahmad yelled for Yudi to get help, kicking with his free leg. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm. Ahmad tried to pull away, but the animal twisted its head, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and swung, striking the dragon's side. It turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking, tail whipping. Saliva dripped from its jaws. Ahmad crawled backward, leaving a smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side just below the ribs. Its jaws locked, teeth sinking deep as it began to pull, ripping through skin and tissue. Ahmad's scream turned into a rasp. Yudi struck again and again. until the creature finally backed off. Ahmed slumped onto his back, eyes open, one hand pressed against the wound. The concrete beneath him gleamed dark red. Yuri ran to the gate, dragging a burlap sack. He waved it near the dragon's face, forcing it to focus on his movement. The animal lunged, and Yuri pulled the gate shut, locking it with trembling hands. He turned to Ahmad, who was still. The blood loss had been catastrophic. By the time emergency responders arrived, Ahmad was gone. Later reports confirmed multiple deep lacerations and significant internal bleeding. Veterinarians said the dragon had shown signs of food aggression. Police contacted Indonesia's Natural Resources Conservation Agency. The Komodo dragon, just under 7 feet long and weighing nearly 140 pounds, was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation centre. It was traced back to illegal trade networks originating from Rinca Island. The story barely made the local newspapers. But within the warehouse community, it circulated quietly, a warning. Those who had seen the pen said Ahmad treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. There are moments I find myself dwelling on, moments that seem to defy explanation, even after all the evidence is laid bare. One such moment involves a bear named Bruno. The attack itself lasted less than 30 seconds, a horrifyingly brief span of time to change so many lives forever. The sanctuary sat on rolling pasture, bordered by pines. It was early summer, with strong sunlight and restless animals. The air carried the smell of hay and meat. That morning, the enclos were quiet, save for the pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal. 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister. Before leaving, he reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted Aaron around 10, but received no reply. He assumed she was busy and began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Marks shouting, "Stop!" Abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbour who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. Then another incident, continents away. It was August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclave beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive. Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Jan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Jan would lead them into the outer section of the enclave for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation, mixed with business. To staff, Jan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Jan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early, and told Yan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Yan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Yan took a broom and bucket toward the enclos, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've always found it difficult to reconcile the beauty of apex predators with the brutal reality of their power. Consider the story of Yan, a worker at a lion lodge. He approached Simba, a seemingly familiar lion, with a broom and gentle words. A colleague even filmed the encounter, perhaps thinking it would be a charming scene. But within moments, the atmosphere shifted. Simba, who had been calmly pacing, suddenly lunged. The attack was swift and decisive. The lion's jaws clamped around Yan's shoulder, driving him to the ground. There was a desperate struggle, but Simba's grip only tightened, his teeth sinking into the back of Yan's neck. The attack was efficient and final, leaving Yan lifeless. The lodge was closed, and Simba was euthanized. The incident was officially deemed preventable, a consequence of complacency and inadequate safety measures. Now, I want to turn our attention to another tragic event, one that unfolded on October 6, 2013, in Mobile, Alabama. The scene: a modest brick house with two large, weathered cages standing under a tin awning. Inside, two chimpanzees made sharp, uneven calls, foreshadowing a small routine that would soon turn violent and irreversible. I've always been haunted by the story of Linda, the zookeeper. It's a stark reminder that even the closest bonds between humans and animals can shatter in an instant. They remembered her as gentle and curious. But behind the condolences lingered a shared disbelief that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. It happened on April 17, 2015, just outside Chicago, Illinois. The afternoon was bright and warm, the kind of day where yellow school buses pull into parking lots. And that's exactly what they did at a small private animal park. It was a roadside zoo, the kind with fading paint and rust eating through the old fences. Families with strollers and school groups carrying packed lunches milled about. Teachers with clipboards struggled to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys crammed into pens. The chimpanzee exhibit sat near the middle of the park, a low chain-link railing and a shallow, algae-lined moat separating visitors from the animals. A hand-painted sign warned, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside, two adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the whole enclosure looked outdated compared to the modern habitats you see in larger, accredited zoos. One of those visitors was Matthew Collins, a 12-year-old sixth grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. He was a bright but impulsive boy, the kind who climbed trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by helping neighbors mow lawns. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance, ignoring the classmates who motioned for him to stop. He leaned forward, focused on his shot. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. He dropped over the rail and into the pit below. He landed hard on his right side, rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then, one of the males, an older broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The two chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the two chimps alternated between lunging and retreating as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Bo released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. There are moments when the line between the wild and the domestic blurs with tragic consequences. I remember reading once about a woman named Belinda Holmes, a name that has stayed with me, a woman who lived in Stamford, Connecticut. It was a quiet afternoon, June 11th, 2014, the kind of day marked by the sounds of lawnmowers and passing cars. But inside her ordinary house on Rockledge Drive, something extraordinary and ultimately horrific was about to unfold. Belinda, you see, had a chimpanzee named Charlie. She had raised him from infancy, treating him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table. Neighbors would often see her walking him on a leash. She was devoted to him, convinced she could control him. But Charlie was still a wild animal. By the age of 12, he weighed over 120 pounds. There had been warning signs, furniture scratched, a musky smell in the air. Months earlier, Charlie had even escaped, chasing cars and pounding on them. But Belinda insisted he was harmless. On that warm June day, with the windows open, Charlie grew restless. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm, and in seconds the attack began. He slammed her backward into the couch, his teeth sinking into her face with terrible force. Neighbours heard the screams, the crashing furniture. He bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled on the carpet. He dragged her back by her clothes when she tried to crawl away, breaking her forearm with a bite. One neighbour peered through the window and saw Charlie hunched over Belinda, covered in blood. They called 911, their voices shaking. Police arrived quickly, hearing the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. They saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers fired their weapons. Charlie collapsed. Belinda was pulled out from under him, barely alive, her face destroyed, her hands mangled. The scene was horrific, furniture overturned, walls splattered with blood. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. I still remember reading about Belinda, a survivor forever marked by a chimpanzee attack. The screams, they said, would stay with them forever. It sparked a national conversation, stricter laws, and a total ban on private chimpanzee ownership in Connecticut. It's a haunting reminder that these animals, no matter how domesticated they seem, possess instincts that can surface in an instant. And it's a lesson that was tragically repeated years later, on the outskirts of Austin, Texas. It was May 28, 2017, a Memorial Day barbecue along the Colorado River. Families gathered, children played, and the afternoon heat shimmered off the water. But one guest had brought an animal that belonged behind glass. The victim was Daniel Ortiz, a 36-year-old high school track coach. He knew the trails, volunteered at a local shelter, and was known for his steadiness. He'd simply stopped by the gathering after a run, drawn by curiosity to the small crowd gathered near the tables. He kept a respectful distance, observing the chimpanzee in its harness, the owner handing out fruit. Daniel, wanting to show his students, moved forward to take a photo. The chimp paced, sniffing, reaching. A thin musk mixed with the charcoal smoke. Adult male chimpanzees, I knew from my research, aren't suited for public gatherings. Dominance is enforced with violence. Years of human handling can't erase those instincts, and crowds, unfamiliar faces, food, they can trigger it all. This picnic site lay just beyond Austin's city limits, beyond municipal oversight. Few realized the handler lacked the proper permits. Some sensed the danger. A couple stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler. A runner called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, waiting for a clear shot. The tension thickened. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry, grunted, eyes fixed on moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash. Daniel stepped forward, maybe 2 feet, to avoid someone's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. Then a blur. The lunge was impossibly fast. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. His phone skidded across the dirt. The first bite tore into his forearm, skin and muscle ripped. He stumbled backward, trying to pull free, but the chimp's grip wouldn't loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams erupted. The chimp dragged Daniel down, pinning him. Daniel tried to roll, but the chimp climbed his torso, hammering his shoulder with fists. The leash tangled, slackened. The chimp seized Daniel's head, bit into his cheek. Blood stained the grass. Attempts to intervene failed. A kick, a shove with a folding chair. Nothing worked. The chimp landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were awful. Wet impacts, ragged breathing, shrieks, and Daniel's grunts as teeth met bone. A woman dragged children away. The owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. He looped it under the chimp's chest, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally weakening. Daniel's movement slowed. Another bite broke a bone in his wrist. Bystanders threw bottles, tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing stopped it. Emergency calls went out, but the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, leash twisted tight. Daniel lay motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds. I've always found the line between human and animal behavior to be razor thin, a line that can vanish in an instant. It's a thought that haunts me, especially after reading accounts of what happened on September 14th, 2018, in Los Angeles. On that day, the morning sun streamed across the lot of a small studio, where a crew was setting up for a simple animal demonstration on a daytime talk show. A chimpanzee, brought in for the segment, had been trained for years, but the press of the lights, the heat, and the unfamiliar faces would prove to be far too much. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old exotic animal trainer with 2 decades of experience, had built his career on patience, teaching wild animals to tolerate human environments. This TV appearance was just another job, another chance to promote his business. Mike, the 13-year-old chimp, had worked with Kevin since he was an infant. At 125 pounds, Mike was fully mature, strong, intelligent, and, when stressed, unpredictable. Kevin often said Mike knew the rhythm of production life, that he could stay calm amidst the noise and movement. But those familiar with chimps knew the truth. Adulthood changes everything. Males that once tolerated crowds often grew volatile as their dominance instincts sharpened. The set was modest. A sofa, coffee table, and painted backdrop under hot studio lamps. Mike sat on a low stool beside Kevin, wearing only a light collar and leash. He shifted constantly, tugging at the strap, scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before the cameras rolled, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment. Mike was showing stress behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply on the lead. But the director insisted they proceed. The schedule was tight, and the sunlight was already shifting. Kevin re-asked everyone that it was fine, offering Mike small pieces of banana to calm him. The tension seemed to fade, at least for the moment. As recording began, the room brightened under the lamps. The host smiled, reading lines about wildlife awareness. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave, a trick they'd rehearsed countless times. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then the boom microphone dipped low, casting a shadow that swept across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. Shoulders hunched, lips curled. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned toward him, voice low, reaching out to calm him. That brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged sideways. The leash snapped tight as Kevin fell backward, the stool clattering across the floor. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room filled with noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment tipping over. A sound technician stumbled into a light stand. Someone yelled to cut the power. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm just below the elbow. The bite tore muscle and tendons clean through. Blood sprayed across the carpet as Kevin twisted, trying to free himself. The chimp released and struck again. Another bite to the shoulder. Another blow with his fists. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. One man swung a tripod to break the attack, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movements slowed. His left arm hung limp. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air, coating the floor in white dust. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, one man carrying another extinguisher, another holding a collapsible baton. The first blast of powder hit Mike square in the chest. He reared back. The second spray pushed him farther away from Kevin, who lay motionless on the floor. Animal control officers arrived within minutes, summoned by the studio's emergency call. They tranquilized Mike on sight, the dart striking his shoulder as he bared his teeth. He staggered briefly before collapsing beside the toppled couch, eyes fluttering. Kevin survived, but barely. Paramedics stabilized him before rushing him to a trauma center. Surgeons later documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. The unpredictability of wildlife, the tension between humans and the natural world, was something Martin Blake was also deeply familiar with. It was October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. The two-lane road curved through steep forested hillsides, trucks grinding gears uphill, motorbikes weaving past them. The road was a lifeline between towns, but for wildlife whose habitat had been divided by asphalt, it had become a dangerous crossing. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer, was traveling alone. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa and wanted one last series of images before flying home. Known for chasing difficult shots, he often left marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortale and stopped where the highway cut clean through forest slopes. He had heard stories of chimpanzees. "I've seen images that stay with you. that haunt your thoughts long after you've turned away. But there's one photograph, recovered from a camera bag, that chills me to the core. A blurred frame of a chimpanzee stepping from the vines seconds before an attack. Martin, a photographer with experience documenting gorillas and monkeys, was driven by a desire for unique images. This sometimes led him to take risks. He'd parked near a bend in the road, camera in hand, hoping to capture a chimpanzee against the backdrop of the mountain road. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees. But Martin, perhaps focused on traffic, waved back, unaware of the true danger lurking in the vegetation. The highway sharply cut through the green ridges. Chimpanzees, in their shrinking habitat, had begun to patrol the edges of the asphalt. Rangers often warned tourists to stay in their vehicles. Truck drivers reported sightings near bends where fruit trees grew close to the road, and locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the morning. Martin had been told as much at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed the warnings, believing his experience with gorillas had prepared him. A few minutes into his walk, he saw movement on the slope above. A large male chimpanzee emerged, pausing at the edge. Two smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting. Martin stepped forward, unaware the chimp had begun to descend. It took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt, closing the gap. Martin lowered his camera as the animal charged, dark arms swinging. The impact knocked him backward, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm, dragging him toward the road's edge. The strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting. Martin screamed, but the chimp straddled him, striking his head. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel. The younger chimps briefly appeared, hooting, before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, biting his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene, throwing stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, its horn startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back, sinking its teeth into his thigh. The sounds were raw. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp retreated, disappearing into the vines, blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless, his clothes torn and soaked. He was lifted onto a passing truck. As they sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors confirmed he was dead on arrival.